Just after noon on Friday, November 2023, Sam Altman joined a video call he thought was routine. Instead, 4 people on the other end, a board most of the world had never heard of, told him he was done. Not stepping aside. Fired. As chief executive of OpenAI, the most important company in artificial intelligence on the planet, there was no warning, no succession plan. Just a few cold sentences published to the world. Minutes later, saying the board no longer trusted a word he told them. Within 72 hours, almost every employee at OpenAI would threaten to quit. Microsoft would move to swallow the company whole. And then, impossibly, the fired CEO would walk back through the front door, and the people who removed him would be the ones gone. This is the story of the 5 days that nearly destroyed OpenAI. And underneath all the chaos sits a question we still cannot answer. When the most powerful technology ever built becomes too dangerous, is anyone actually able to stop it? To understand how it fell apart in a weekend, you have to understand how strangely OpenAI was built. It started in 2015 as a nonprofit, with a mission that sounds almost impossible: to build artificial general intelligence, AI smarter than humans at nearly everything, and make sure it benefited all of humanity, not just a handful of powerful people. But that kind of research costs billions. So OpenAI did something no ordinary company would dare. It bolted a for-profit business onto the side of the nonprofit. Investors could pour in money and earn a return, but only up to a cap. And sitting above all of it was a small, unusual board whose job was not to make money. Their job was to protect the mission. And if they ever decided the CEO was putting that mission in danger, they had the power to remove him. On paper, it was a safeguard. In reality, it was a loaded gun sitting on the table, waiting. By late 2023, OpenAI was the hottest company on Earth. ChatGPT had become the fastest-growing product in history. Altman was one of the most famous people alive, testifying before Congress, meeting world leaders, and quietly negotiating a deal that would value the company at around $86 billion. From the outside, it looked unstoppable. Inside the boardroom, the trust had already cracked. And that crack had a name. The night before, one board member had texted Altman asking to talk the next day at noon. Altman suspected nothing. That board member was Ilya Sutskever, OpenAI's brilliant chief scientist, the mind behind much of its technology, and for years, one of Altman's closest partners. The tensions underneath had been building for months. Arguments over how fast to release products, arguments over safety, and a flashpoint. One director, Helen Toner, had co-authored a research paper that gently criticized OpenAI's approach to safety and praised her rivals. Altman was furious and reportedly tried to push her off the board. To some directors, that looked like exactly the thing they were built to stop: a CEO trying to remove his own oversight. So on Friday, November 17th, they pulled the trigger. On that noon call, the board told Altman he was fired. Minutes later came the public post. The board had concluded that Altman was, in their words, not consistently candid in his communications, a corporate way of saying they no longer believed him. And Ilya, his closest partner, was one of the votes against him. The company's own genius had turned on its own CEO. The fallout was instant. Greg Brockman, president and co-founder, quit in protest within hours. Myra Murati, the chief technology officer, was named interim CEO. Microsoft, which had poured over $10 billion into OpenAI, reportedly found out just minutes before the rest of the world, and its leaders were furious. And that $86 billion deal, the one that would have made hundreds of employees suddenly wealthy, was now in serious danger. Then something strange happened. The board went quiet. They had fired the most famous CEO in tech and given almost no explanation, not to investors, not even to their own staff. Into that silence rushed panic. Nobody could say exactly what Altman had done, because the board wouldn't say. Behind the scenes, the pressure to reverse it began almost immediately. Investors pushed. Microsoft pushed. Over Saturday, there were talks to bring Altman back, but they stalled. The board dug in. A deadline came and went. And instead of reinstating him, they made an even bolder move. They brought in a second outside CEO, Emmett Shear, the former head of Twitch. And at almost the same moment, Microsoft's chief executive, Satya Nadella, played his card. He announced that Altman and Brockman would join Microsoft to lead a brand new advanced AI lab, and that any OpenAI employee who wanted to follow them could come too. In a single stroke, the fired CEO suddenly had somewhere far more powerful to land, and a door held open for the entire company. And that's when the people rose up. A letter began circulating inside OpenAI. First a few hundred names, then more than 700, out of a staff of around 770. The demand was blunt. The board must resign and bring back Sam Altman, or we all leave for Microsoft tonight. Across social media, employees posted the same line over and over. OpenAI is nothing without its people, followed by a single heart. And then came the moment that captured the whole absurd tragedy. Ilya Sutskever, the man whose vote had helped trigger all of it, signed that letter. He posted publicly that he deeply regretted his participation in the board's actions and that he would do everything he could to reverse them. The person who had pulled the trigger was now begging to undo it. Now the board was trapped. Fire back at their own workforce, and the company would evaporate overnight. Negotiations ran through the night. Emmett Shear, the interim CEO, lasted barely 72 hours. And in the early hours of November 22nd, just 5 days after that Friday call, it was over. Sam Altman was reinstated as CEO of OpenAI, but the board that removed him did not survive. Most of its members stepped down. A new board was assembled, chaired by former Salesforce co-CEO Brett Taylor, alongside figures like former U.S. Treasury Secretary Larry Summers. The safeguard had been fired exactly once. And then, quietly, it was taken off the table for good. So who really won? On the surface, Altman did. Back in power, more secure than before. His rivals, gone. But step back, and the story is far bigger than one man's job. OpenAI had been deliberately designed so that a small group of people could halt a dangerous AI mission if they ever needed to. The one time that group actually tried, the money, the market, and the workforce crushed them in a single weekend. That is the uncomfortable thing these 5 days left behind. We keep reassuring ourselves that if artificial intelligence ever becomes truly dangerous, someone responsible will be able to pull the brakes. OpenAI had built exactly that brake on purpose. And the first time anyone reached for it, it snapped off in their hands. The company survived. The technology only accelerated. But the belief that anyone is truly in control of the rise of AI, that may have been the real casualty of those 5 days in November. If you want to understand how we built something this powerful this fast, watch this next. The story of how artificial intelligence was born in a single summer from a handful of people who promised a thinking machine in just 2 months. Subscribe, and I'll see you there.